right, so good morning, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our third broadcast of the day here at Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. My name is Jesse. For our new audience today, joining us from all over Canada and the US and Ireland today, which is very exciting as well. We are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. You can check out everything we do on our website. We've got 40 broadcasts every single month, and all of them, including this one, live on YouTube forever. So if you want to catch this 3 years down the road, look at Kyle and I back as younger men, you absolutely can, and check that out. But today we are going to dive in with the start of a very special series we are doing all year long in conjunction with the amazing folks at ECOP Canada, the Early Career Ocean Professionals. We did a big Oceans Week Spectacular with them last year, and this year we are doubling down, doing a program every single month with an amazing Early Career Ocean Professional, and then another big festival series in June. Now, this is being done in conjunction with the amazing folks at the Coal Coalition, the Canadian Ocean Literacy Coalition, and of course, the ECOP Decade Canada team. Neha has helped organize a really exciting series, so a big thank you to her for getting this off the ground. Now, today we are kicking off with Kyle Armstrong, and he's got the best job in the world. He gets to help bring back ecosystems to health. He gets to help rewild. His work has taken him around the world, South America, South Africa, and more. Today, he's joining us in BC, talking about some really special projects that he and his team get up to help restore ecosystems. So I'm going to stop talking. I don't want to steal his thunder anymore. Without further ado, Kyle, thank you so much for joining us from the other side of the continent. I'm in Newfoundland, so I'm closer to Africa than you, which is a testament to how incredible this country that we live in is. And I'm excited to hear about your work to save a little part of it.
Jesse, thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. What a great program this is. And yeah, just really excited to share some of the work and things that I've been involved with, and to a really diverse and wide-ranging audience. This is fantastic.
Amazing. Well, you are good to go, man. Your slide deck is full screen, so let's roll into it, and can't wait for Q&A at the end.
Okay, excellent. Yes, thank you, Jesse. I will take it away. My name is Kyle Armstrong. I am the executive director of Peninsula Stream Society, a very kind of smaller non-government organization on the southern tip of Vancouver Island on the west coast of British Columbia, Canada. I'm living and working in the Wasonic traditional territories, and feel very privileged to be able to work on their territories. I get to speak to you guys about some really exciting stuff. As Jesse mentioned, I do think I have the best job in the world. I've been really fortunate, and I have the amazing job of bringing back the wild or restoring natural ecosystems to their health. And I'm really excited to talk to you folks about that today. A little bit about me and my journey. I really want to just kind of share a little bit of background of what led me here in this kind of thing. And I grew up on the coast of British Columbia, and if you haven't been there, it's a really beautiful place, a huge temperate rainforest, beautiful coastal ecosystems, amazing amounts of biodiversity, lots of cool and interesting animals to really capture your imagination. One of my first jobs out of university, graduating as a young undergrad from environmental studies and anthropology, I got a job, and it was really this dream job working with the Nature Conservancy of Canada, a larger conservancy nationwide that buys and protects lands, and in some cases restores those lands. And I had the wonderful opportunity to be kind of the coastal wetlands intern kind of manager per kid who got to work with all these different biologists across the province in our region, and write management plans for these really special areas that were all in kind of different phases of their protection. And there was this one moment in this one project in the Cowichan estuary in Cowichan Bay, another area in Vancouver Island, a really important area. And they had bought this farmland in the estuary. And there was these really interesting stories of how for many years they had used pesticides on this farm, and there was no frogs calling, and there was no kind of songbirds or any kind of noises. This really kind of dead area in what should have been this really lively place. And since the Nature Conservancy had acquired the land, they stopped putting pesticides on and just kind of left it for about a decade. And slowly over time, those frog choruses started to come back, and the birds started calling, and all of this life came back to it. And it was really just for me to be able to come at that kind of point when things were starting to come back and life was kind of returning to this place, and having all the different people who had worked to do that come together and kind of recognize that with us. It really blew my mind, so to speak, about how amazing nature is at recovering herself, or Mother Nature is at recovering herself and healing herself and bringing species back. And I really just became fascinated about how people can kind of help that process along and facilitate that process and speed it up potentially even. And I was just sucked into this world of ecological restoration in which that's exactly what we try to do. And through that internship, there was many examples of this, working with salmon, Pacific salmon, we would fix streams in their habitats and from, removing culverts and things that were blocking them from migrating upstream to lay their eggs. And as soon as we did that, and we gave nature room to do its thing, it was amazing how fast the recovery and how amazing things could turn around in the system. So that kind of really started me on this path. I had another kind of spell after university. I was working as a wildlife guide in a number of different outfits, traveling through the Great Bear Rainforest, this area of central British Columbia, coastal central British Columbia, that is just this amazing wild place with, a long, long history of management and cultivation by the indigenous peoples that live there, and incredible amounts of biodiversity. We have spirit bears, we have killer whales, these huge megafauna and intact predator-prey ecosystems. And I just had this wonderful opportunity to explore these and share them with people and meet the people that were living there, and explore these ecosystems and kind of almost, it seems kind of cliche, but step back in time and just kind of be able to see a lot of these ecosystems well before they had kind of begun to be degraded or impacted by folks in a large way. After this kind of stint, I really wanted to learn more, and I kind of saw these beautiful places, but every time I'd come back to the city and these kind of urban areas, and I would be left feeling kind of a little bit more alone, or the place was missing something. And so I went back to school to get my master's in science in ecological restoration. And one of the projects that I worked on was with the Rain Coast Conservation Foundation, working to restore the Fraser River and its estuary. And the Fraser River estuary, if you don't know, is just this powerhouse river that flows through most of British Columbia, or a large portion of British Columbia, and flows right out to the city of Vancouver, essentially. The city of Vancouver, it sits on the delta of this massive river system. And it is just kind of incredible to be working there because, and then this photo was taken on a day when, fog had rolled in, we were doing our field work, and I looked around at this massive estuary, and usually when that fog isn't there, that whole skyline in behind the estuary is a massive city. It's a metropolis. But on this day, the fog had rolled in, and all I could see were the kind of marsh plains of what is this incredible system that, hosted huge populations of salmon and huge amounts of people able to live there, and huge amounts of species that lived off of this system. And I was just, for a moment, I'd always kind of grown up in this area and seen this system as city, as urban, as, this kind of industrial area. And for a moment, I was closed in, and I could just imagine and kind of think back to what this system would have looked like a few hundred years, or before contact, or 1,000 years, thinking back at just the ecological productivity of this site that would have existed. And I just had this, kind of feeling of what was. And this is kind of, a little bit more indicative of that top left photo. Would be kind of what you'd see when the fog lifted, and you see kind of coal development in the city, and bridges and big skyscrapers and things like that. And yet there's still, large populations of different species, huge amounts of biodiversity that still rely on this place as an ecosystem. And it's just kind of at this point where, where we kind of have these conflicting values of development and growth, but at the same time, Mother Nature and these many different ecological species are kind of hanging on to the large productivity, and we're fighting over kind of the last places of this area, and fighting to protect them, and it's a really interesting spot to be in this spot of time, and able to kind of think of what could be. So we kind of are able to vision what was, what is, And hopefully, if we work together, I was part of one project that worked on marsh restoration for salmon, and there were many other groups working all over the Fraser River towards similar goals and objectives for nature, and just what it will take to kind of protect this system and at least hold on to some of these values that exist. This is kind of a bad photo. It's a little bit grainy. I apologize. But, while I would work on the estuary of the Fraser River during the day and in the early morning trapping fish and getting an idea of where they were moving throughout the estuary. And then when I would ride to the university itself to upload the data and write my reports and go to classes, I would ride my bike through the urban greenway systems. And it was just this amazing, because at the time I was learning about habitat fragmentation, or building roads through habitats and splitting things up, and by riding my bike to school and following these greenways, you basically follow the last kind of natural areas left in urban areas. So you're kind of cruising along old rivers and through little pockets of forest, and it was just a really wonderful lesson in ecology, where we had black bears, bobcats, coyotes using the same pathways. And I just kind of got this really wonderful idea or kind of sense of coexistence, and in that through these kind of bicycle infrastructures and protections of kind of the riparian areas, and through these greenways and the protection of the streams in the cities, we were protecting enough that there could still be apex predators walking around in an urban center, which is just absolutely amazing. Still eating salmon from the streams, still eating berries along the greenways. And there was this kind of aha moment where it was like, wow, we can live in a way that supports these populations. We can still live with even in an urban area, still have these predators around. And what does that take? And not only does it take the kind of ecological infrastructure, these greenways and healthy rivers and foraging plants for them to eat from, but also this kind of cultural acceptance of these species. So, this black bear, if I had gone up to this black bear, rode my bike up beside it and tried to take a selfie with it, and maybe it attacked me or mauled me or did something, the bear would be put down. And so not only was this natural infrastructure there for the bear to exist, but also I had been educated, and my classmates had been educated from an early age on bear behavior and what to do and not to do, and don't leave your garbage cans out. And there was all these education programs in the area that allowed bears to coexist and people to coexist with bears in a way where both species could live without conflict. And there was just an incredible amount of work that goes into that element. And it's probably even more important than the actual ecological side of things, is that understanding of what a bear needs, and that understanding of how to behave and accept living with the bear in your space. So when I finished university, I had this wonderful opportunity to go and apply all this kind of wonderful things I've learned on this study in the south of Kamchatka, which is in very far rural eastern Russia, kind of the Alaska of Russia. And we did this, crazy brown bear study with Russian scientists, where we would basically look at the impacts of ecotourism on these bears and what bear viewing did to their behavior and how it impacted that. And it was a really interesting study. We were able to bring things that I'd learned bear guiding in Canada to these folks in Russia to try to improve their practice of bringing tourism in to view bears and gain money from an economic benefits to the people in the local communities by a non-consumptive approach to looking at these bears. So we're not hunting them, we're just viewing them and respecting and learning about them, and so that sort of model. But what happened was that this is also a large, the bears are all here because it's one of the largest sockeye salmon runs in Asia, or on that side of the world. And it became apparent that the fish weren't coming back. And so this is a lake high up in the system, down at the mouth of the river, where the salmon were coming back to try to come to this lake to spawn and feed all the bears and all the different species. People were fishing those salmon out at unsustainable rates, and they weren't able to come back up. So what happened was the bear researchers were able to kind of use ecotourism. All these sad tourists, we had to close areas down for viewing because the bears were so hungry, they were getting aggressive and angry. You couldn't have bear viewing. It wasn't conducive to bear viewing. So then we had upset people who'd spend really large amounts of money to come see these bears. And we were able to use that and basically go to the people fishing down below and say, hey, look, like you're interrupting this other economy that exists further upstream. Not only are you having ecological impacts, but a lot of time people listen to money, you're having economic impacts. And so with that piece, we were able to kind of tell the fish, we were able to basically make it so they let more salmon come back up the river to a rate where it was sustainable. And they were able to fill the tributaries with fish, feed the bears. We were able to watch the bears. And it was this really kind of wonderful success story of how by tying in more relationship, by creating a relationship with the bears, we're actually allowed to create better ecosystem management with the salmon. So it was this really wonderful and kind of real world application of kind of some of these things that I've learned, which is really neat. And just one more kind of case study and kind of big awakening aha moment. When I was in South Africa, I was part of this rhino poaching study. And at the time, that big horn on that rhino's face was the most expensive resource in South Africa. I forget how much it was worth, but that thing is, worth more than gold sitting on its face. And so there was this huge kind of scourge, and there still is, of rhino poaching, where they would kill the rhino and take the horn and sell it to Asian markets, where they use it for kind of a symbol of wealth, but also as medicine. And so what we tried to do was look at what's driving this poaching, first of all, and then what's working, like what are people doing to protect these rhinos that's actually working on the ground. And we looked at all of these different kind of methods to protecting rhinos, from preemptively cutting off the horn and storing it away in these vast highly protected bunkers, or dyeing the rhino horn because that made it less desirable to poach, or putting in troops into the park reserve systems to protect the rhinos 24/7, or having drones or dogs to seek out poachers, or all of these kind of militant tactics. And then we also looked at some of the more social tactics, where rather than kind of putting military folks in the parks, they brought communities into the parks and around the parks, and they gave folks that lived around the parks jobs working in the parks. And they really kind of turned the angle where, these parks and these wildlife aren't nuisances for the people living around them, but essentially that they're these wonderful resources for the communities living around them, and that they have an interest and should protect these resources. And lo and behold, when we looked at all of these different kind of tactics protecting rhino, what we found was that yes, you can put militants on the ground and protect rhinos, and you can fight the poachers with AK-47s and guns, but there is a much more effective strategy of just that, bringing in the communities around it and educating them, bringing kids into the park, and changing how the communities view these kind of reserve or protected areas, and again, changing it and making them see it as a resource. So that was a really big eye opener for me, is that by bringing people into the park system and bringing people into nature can be really, really effective ways of conservation. And we've kind of gotten a little bit mixed up in the plot and thinking of the wild and thinking of these natural areas as void of people. And it's just not the case. It's we have to think of humans as part of the ecosystem, as ourselves as part of the ecosystem, and part of that picture and part of that solution. And we have to stop thinking of nature in this kind of light that it's separate from us. This next photo, this is a Haida chief carving a reconciliation pole down in Vancouver that was later raised by the community at UBC, the University of British Columbia. But this picture's here because this isn't new. This idea isn't new, of everything being connected and people being part of a nature. This is wisdom and something that was learned and done by many groups, many indigenous groups across the world, and particularly in my region. There's all sorts of different practices and guidelines and management techniques and wisdom and knowledge that goes into this. And it's a huge and deep and really complex and dynamic knowledge base that exists. And, in typical colonial fashion, we kind of came in and as settlers and kind of just pushed that all to the side and kind of went about our business. And we're seeing the consequences of that now. And luckily, there's a lot of effort to recognize that piece now, that knowledge base that exists, and bring that in and put it in a position of leadership and power. And I think that is a huge step towards some of the conservation and restoration initiatives. So restoration is a word I've been throwing around quite a bit. Ecological restoration, rewilding. There's lots of different kind of words and verbiage that goes around. And I think that's because it kind of exists on a spectrum. And depending on where you are, if you look at this continuum, this scale of development. So maybe on the right side, you have, a kind of a natural looking forest. Looks like there might be one little house there. You can see a large mammal standing there. And then you slide all the way down to the left and you're looking at like a really dense, full on metropolis city like New York or something like that. And so wherever you are kind of on this spectrum, what you can do towards recovery of natural systems kind of changes. If you're on the right, you might be able to fully get a really good recovering native ecosystem going. Whereas if you're on the left, where do you start? I think you start by looking at reducing the impacts of people and reducing the societal impacts that exist. So depending where you're on that scale, restoration kind of takes on a different meaning. And for me at Peninsula Stream Society, we're kind of in Victoria, Southern Vancouver Island. It's this really interesting mix of rural and also urban areas. And one thing I really liked about our organization is that we kind of understood all of this, and we take this three-pronged approach to restoring ecosystems and doing conservation. And that's, we're looking to do research. We're looking to learn more about the systems that we're working in. We're looking to take that research and take it to the politicians and local governments, all the way up to the federal governments, and basically advocate for more protections, more conservation, and better practices and management of our ecosystems, while we're also doing education and outreach to the local public. So all the folks who are living in these watersheds and along these shorelines and in these ecosystems and alongside these ecosystems, whether they're urban or more rural, we're going to them directly and saying, this is how you live next to a river. This is how you live next to a shoreline. This is why these activities are bad and these are good. And at the same time, we're also doing active restoration. So things like removing culverts and putting large wood and habitat back into streams and doing plantings and removing invasive species. We're bringing communities in to do that with us and to help us with that, and giving them the tools to look and be able to gauge the health of those ecosystems on their own. This is a picture of the Saanich Peninsula. I don't think many people recognize where this is. It's just on the southern tip of Vancouver Island. It's largely where we work. But what's interesting, all those red kind of lines that are outlining different areas, those are all different, what we call watersheds or catchments. So those are all kind of individual systems or streams, where on the right, we have two species of Pacific salmon. We have coastal cutthroat trout on the top, which spend most of their lives living in the streams, and then will often go out to the ocean in some life histories to eat and forage. And then we have coho salmon below, which will spend a year in the stream and then head out for a few years out to the open ocean and get really big. So Pacific salmon are these kind of keystone species. And what I mean by keystone is that they're kind of these central species within an ecosystem that kind of drive the whole thing and prop up the whole thing. So salmon are feeding loads of different species, and many, many different species rely on them. And part of that is because they develop this strategy to go out to the open ocean, and they're one of the fastest growing species of fish because of it. They are born really quite small in the streams, they get a little bit bigger, they head out to the open ocean, and then they just pack on the pounds. They get huge. They're eating tons of the rich nutrients from the ocean and collecting all of those, and then bringing them back, swimming kilometers up these streams, and then laying their eggs and dying, sometimes a meter or two from where they were born. So they're going out and they're basically just these giant resource harvesters. They're going out and bringing all these things and bringing them way back up into these terrestrial systems, which is feeding these ecosystems. So for us, not only are these ecologically important, but if you can think of from a people perspective, this is a wonderful animal. What a great fish. I mean, it's just going out, getting huge, coming back right to your doorstep, and you can pick them out of the river and eat them. So, I mean, amazing, not only ecologically, but culturally. These are really, really important species. And we kind of use this species as our focus for restoration, because if we can get a ecosystem good enough that a coho can survive for the 1 to 2 years that it lives in the freshwater systems, or these cutthroat, which is up to 8 or 9 years living in these freshwater systems, if we can get our systems back to that level of health, we're looking pretty good. Like that means the system's at a pretty good level of health. So that's kind of our goal, and we can bring in tons and tons of people around that. What I love about my job and being an ecological restorationist is it's so dynamic. You need to have kind of a biology understanding. You have to have a freshwater understanding. You have to have a cultural understanding of the different people. You have to be very social and be able to speak to many different groups and reason with them. You have to have a botany understanding of the plants and ecosystems and how everything comes together. And there's just all of these different things that come together. And part of that is because we're trying to put back together lots of things that have lost. And so you almost have to be a detective, and you have to look through historical records, look at old maps, talk to people that used to remember what was there. And you're kind of piecing all these information back together to try to get an idea of what was, so that you know what you're trying to get the system back to. And that's something I really, really enjoy about this work. You also have to kind of recognize what is. And so looking at, your watershed or your stream area and figuring out, what does it look like now, and how is that different, and how does that function differently? And one thing we notice is that we've paved a lot. There's a lot of impermeable surface, and that's creating a lot of water runoff and things rushing and hot, fast and toxic water, because basically people do not like having water on our landscape. So we basically focus it and rush it as quickly as we can to the local stream and just rush all this water towards it. And it's picking up contaminants, and it's picking up heat from the sun on the hot asphalt. And it's really just wreaking havoc on all of our local streams and fish populations. So we have this huge kind of underlying issue we need to address. These toxics, water that's coming off of the pavement can kill things, and we have lots of die-offs of our fish in streams when people pour chemicals down the drain or use chemicals on the landscape that ends up making it into the drain. And so a lot of what we do is trying to educate people about this and figuring out what they can do. And one thing we're trying to do is just changing how people think of water on the landscape. And rather than think of water as this thing that, we got to get rid of it, we hate water on the landscape, think about how we can hold water on the landscape in a nice way and filter it and cool it and slow it down for a little bit and build that kind of mindset into our cities, how we design our cities and our homes. And it's something that everyone can do. Everyone can kind of appreciate and learn to look at water in a different light and learn to kind of steward water in a different way. So we've developed this rain garden program where we're essentially doing just that. We remove pavement and put in gardens so that it'll intercept and hold water before it makes it into a drain and can flow into the local stream and cool it and filter it and do all these wonderful things before it goes into the water. We also do lots of in-stream stuff. So we work with stewards to build riffles and habitat. We put large wood back into the streams because that makes really nice habitat for the fish. And again, we're doing it with the communities around us. So while we're doing this work, people are learning and they're understanding, this is in my backyard and this is pretty interesting, and can tell their neighbor about it. And when they see someone pouring something down a drain, can say, that's going to a place that we just fixed. Like, please don't do that. We're creating habitat, and in some cases where fish have left or are no longer there, we're bringing them back to those streams, and we're incubating them in the eggs, and we're telling people, hey, we have fish back in these streams again. This is a fish-bearing stream. It's salmon. And for people here, that really hits a note. And when people know that there are salmon living in a stream, they respect that area a lot more. So that's a large part of what we do. The other thing we look at is what they're eating. And in this case, we have surf smelt and Pacific sandlance from top to bottom, 2 species of forage fish. And these guys are interesting because they lay their eggs on the actual beach. So where you're hanging out and going for walks and sitting on your towel, these guys lay their eggs, and that's where they spawn, and that's where they develop. And this is a picture of that, way up on the upper area. And salmon just love them. I mean, the photo on the left, that's 500 of those Pacific sandlance I just showed you that was removed from one salmon's stomach. So they are eating a lot of these guys. So if we're going to protect salmon, we also need to think about not only where are they, spending parts of their lives in the streams, but also what are they eating. And so we work with community groups to go and basically look in the sand under a microscope and figure out where these eggs are. If there are eggs at a beach, we map it. And then we can share that information and tell people, this is a beach that's important. It's got eggs of these small fish where they're laying their eggs, and we need to protect it and respect it. And this is a photo of those eggs developing in the sand at the beach and turning in and growing and taking off again. And so this allows us to protect these beaches from things like pollution. We have creosote, those tarred logs that sometimes wash up on beaches. We have failing backshores where, people have put in bulkheads and things like that, and they start to crumble. And we also have armored shorelines where we've completely buried the beach or, put a seawall behind it, and with sea level rise, it's disappearing. So there's all these impacts that are hurting our shorelines that we need to be aware of and be able to understand which ones are important for these small fish so that we can try to protect them. We also do beach cleans, which is a great way to get everyone to come down to the beach and talk about some of these different issues while we're moving lots of microplastics and plastics and foams and things like that. Another technique we use is beach nourishment. So just like we bring gravel in for the salmon to lay their eggs in, we also bring in sands and gravels for these forage fish to lay their egg, where they may have disappeared due to roads being built in behind and hard armoring along the shoreline. And this was a recent project, and this is my last slide of a project that we did that removed a lot of kind of hard armoring, cement, metal from this really beat up kind of shoreline area, and we replaced it with kind of a sand and a gravel, which people love because people love nice sandy beaches. But within a few weeks, we had surf smelt, one of those spawning fishes, coming to this beach and spawning. And so again, just one of those really nice kind of encouraging moments from Mother Nature that shows when we kind of make room and facilitate and give room and stop kind of some of the damaging and impacts that we're incurring, that we can really have some really wonderful successes and really play a role in the recovery of some of these ecosystems. So with that, thank you very much. I hope you maybe learned one or two things. I'm excited to answer any questions you might have. That's a brief overview of kind of where we are and what we're doing and trying to achieve, and a little bit about what I get to do every day, which is I'm so happy to share with you. And thank you so much for having me.
Well, Kyle, first of all, what a cool job. I mean, of all the roles in conservation in the world, what you get to do is so diverse, and you get to bring things back, which is it's something that's really speaking to a lot of classrooms lately. Rewilding as a concept is something that's really taken off around the world on a local and international level, which is really exciting to see, and some really concrete solutions there, which is spectacular. So thank you very, very much for that. If you can't see me and want to exit screen share so we can have a bit of a conversation, by all means, play around with that. If you can see me, great. YouTubers, feel free to share questions in the chat. But I'll begin with one we got via email, and it was about restoring habitats versus protecting them to begin with. So a lot of science stories nowadays are like, we're going to bring back the mastodon, or we're going to, reverse this incredible loss with some technological wonderkin solution after the fact. Can you speak to the sort of benefits of working proactively rather than trying to solve things long after they're in a really dire state?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's an excellent question, and one that this field struggles with quite a bit. And I mean, the easy answer is, there's nothing better than protecting an ecosystem or habitat in the first place. When we're coming in, it's bad or not bad, but it's unfortunate if we have to come in and try to fix something. Obviously Mother Nature is the best at doing what she does, and protecting those areas should be priority number one. And for us, I think, and what we're trying to achieve as well is when we're doing these restoration projects and kind of facilitating that recovery of nature, we're also trying to bring people in and using it as a tool to, one, create connection. So, giving people that sense of place and understanding and saying, this actually exists and you can be you play a role in its protection and its stewardship. And creating that connection, I think, is really important because people are voters. Fish don't vote. And so if we can bring people into these ecosystems and show them what's at stake and show them, potentially what's wrong, and empower them to do something about it and create that connection, that real visceral connection, then I think, those people can then go to the voting stands and vote for politicians and vote for practices and policies that will protect those ecosystems and will, hold people accountable when those things are under threat. So that's kind of the strategy we take, and kind of how we look at it. But again, if you can, we're not as good as Mother Nature. We never are. I don't think we ever will be. And so, yeah, to protect those systems, conservation is amazing. But again, looking at conservation as something that isn't separate from people, and management of natural areas isn't void of people, and that a lot of these places, some of the places with the highest amounts of biodiversity weren't void of people. They just had people that knew what they were doing, and looked at themselves and played a role within that ecosystem that worked to help foster more diversity.
That's a beautiful answer. And you touched upon some of my very favorite things. For one, you mentioned voting, which we do have some high schoolers joining us today in Vermont. And it's really worth noting that this is probably the biggest single impact that most people will have, is picking the governments that help shape the policies around protecting habitats. Right now, it's pretty stark in a lot of countries around the world, where sort of one half of the spectrum is saying, let's do away with nature. Climate change isn't real. Who cares about the oceans? And the other's very much the opposite. And so you can make a big difference when you are a voting age. And in the meantime, you can talk to your parents, talk to your teachers, talk to friends, and make a positive difference that way. On the nature recovery note, and community conservation, getting people involved, we love doing programs with the Whitley Award winners. It's the best nature conservation award in the world, and pretty much universally, it is people and groups that follow exactly what you said. When you get communities involved, when they have a vested interest in protecting that resource, that species, what have you, it really does go a long way to making lasting change in the areas. Please interrupt.
They rang a bell in my head there. So, and just to add to that is similar to that South Africa, the Rhino, engaging communities around those protected areas. We play an important role where we can vote, but also we can take our own place that we are and provide some of these benefits that you see in conservation areas. And that, I think that's really what needs to happen, is that, yes, we can set aside these lands for conservation and kind of be like, oh, it's okay, we can do whatever we want over here. We have those areas set over there, but really everything is connected. And, we can take action on local yards, or if you live in a building, working within a community to plant native species and pollinator species, and look at the practices that exist in your own home and your own community, and find ways to get involved and make those better on the ground. Because, and there's a large movement right now, I forget what it's called, but I think it's like national parks in your backyard or something like that.
National park cities. Yep.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and being able, and bat friendly cities and bird friendly cities and all these different things where we can really just look at what our impact is, and maybe even our benefit is, and try to develop that and foster that to create buffers around these protected areas.
That's a beautiful answer. I really do encourage our classes. Do look up National Park City. London is the sort of go-to example of this. Bat boxes, you mentioned, which is just a spectacular resource. Bat Conservation International does a lot around that. And increasingly pollinator groups. You talked about planting local plants, bringing back native pollinators. This is something that every schoolyard can do, every student can do in their literal backyard if you have one. And it does genuinely go a long way to helping protect these species. So this is a great resource and set of ideas for you. Now, you highlighted at the top of your talk, say that 5 times fast, some of these amazing natural spaces that you had the chance to visit and be a part of and do research in. We have students joining in Toronto. You mentioned New York City earlier. If you're in the heart of a big urban center and that's not as necessarily available to you, what's a way that you can come to connect with nature and realize the value of it in the way that you did? I'd love your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, again, like some of the most eye-opening kind of and inspiring moments for me have been in urban areas and looking at where nature's been able to cling on. And it could be as small as, like someone's backyard, but but also, these systems of greenways that are established in different cities, and looking through different bike paths and walkways and exploring those areas, urban streams, and going to find those pockets of nature that exist in your town or city, small parks, residential parks and things like that, and beginning to take a lens of, well, how close is this park to the nearest, larger park? And then what exists between those two parks, and looking at those corridors to connect even the smallest of protected areas, I think is really quite interesting. And just kind of beginning to look at your city in kind of that lens of where are all the different little pockets of nature and they exist and how are they connected? Are they connected? Could they be connected? And enhanced, like if you're like, well, this park is really close to this park, which actually has this species, and maybe we could potentially create some habitat for that species in this park as another kind of supporting habitat or buffer. So I think kind of looking at it that lens, just because you don't have a massive national park in your backyard, I think there's always room and sometimes really interesting in terms of ecology and ecological theory and that kind of stuff. Like if you start looking at your city, there's really interesting examples and things to look at and observations to make just from an ecological perspective.
I grew up in Toronto, so biggest city in Canada, and we had deer in my backyard. Literally, we've had coyotes on our street. There are bald eagles right on Lake Ontario in Toronto, which is astonishing to me. There's a really great ecological corridor program right in place right now that's being funded by the government. The best corridor system, which is incidentally of national parks, but covers a lot of land in between Yellowstone to Yukon. Our classes should look up. It's an amazing initiative. I really encourage that. And one thing that we really like to focus on is exploring by the seat of your pants. In May, we do backyard bio. So we get kids all over the world going out, exploring their local neck of the woods, seeing what they can find. The Seek app is the best thing ever. It's Pokemon Go for nature. You have your phone, you're in the heart of a major park. You're like, what kind of weird fungus is that? That's an odd tree. I don't know what that is. Take a picture of it. It'll tell you all about it. It'll tell you where it lives. It'll give you cool facts about it. And it's just a nice way of illustrating that whether you are in the Amazon or New York City, you're surrounded by wildlife. Like you're not disconnected from it, no matter how urban your space is. And that really does go a long way to fostering the sort of ideals that Kyle's been espousing in this entire talk. And I think that's a really special thing for our classes, wherever you're listening. Please, just tell me to be quiet anytime, Kyle. I'll keep talking if you don't stop.
I just think that's a great point. I just want to throw another plug in for iNaturalist, because as a practitioner or a manager, I can't emphasize as much how much we use that app and the data from those types of kind of community science apps in our decision making and being able to inform kind of like those beach surveys that we do looking for the spawning eggs. A lot of times we can go to iNaturalist and people have seen those fish either stranded on a beach or have been fishing nearby and they've loaded it up. And that gives us a really great head start to be like, oh, I think maybe some of that habitat might be nearby. They don't have a huge range. They've been spotted nearby. That gives us a great starting point. And that's just one example of a gajillion that exists, I think, where that data is being used for really good stuff.
Like if you as a classroom, high schoolers especially, use iNaturalist, you're contributing to real citizen science. Scientists like Kyle actually use this stuff. I mean, I found the bald eagles in Toronto because I looked up where people had found them. You can type in any city in the world, type in any animals, see where they're located in the city, find those biodiverse hotspots. And that's an amazing, that's black magic. When I was a boy, I would have died. I would give my left arm to have a tool like that. And it's accessible at your fingertips with your phone now, which is really, really special. Kyle, time flies when you're having fun. We're nearing the end of the broadcast. And I mean, this is the thing. We could take questions all day long. This is half the fun of these shows. We find a lot of students nowadays are very pessimistic. They hear stories about the Great Barrier Reef's collapsing, ecosystems are going to hell in a handbasket, everything's too hot, everything's going wrong. How, in your role, can you help give them a more positive outlook? Because there is reason for hope, and there's a lot of good things going on, not just from your organization, but around the globe. Is there anything that you'd point them to, whether it's resources or a mindset that you have to give them an optimistic outlook?
Yeah, I mean, things are really grim, and I feel for people in school right now, and you get a really kind of grim message. And I remember being in first year university, and they kind of hit you with all the problems like right away. They're like, this is what's happening. This is, there's collapse over here and sea level rise over here, and oh, it's a whole mess that's made. Here you go. And but what happened as it kind of went further into my field is that you do start to become aware of all these amazing initiatives and all these really incredible things that are going on, and with marriages with technology, reconciliation with Indigenous peoples and their knowledge and empowerment of those people. And I think there's lots of these kind of things and grassroots movements that are happening that by participating gives you quite a bit of hope. There's no better feeling, I think, than after we finished one of our volunteer events and folks have, are dirty, they're sore, they've built some habitat for some salmon to come back to, and then they can walk there with their friends later and kind of point it out and say, I helped do that, and you can see a salmon has been there. So there's these small actions, and I think we like to empower people, and I think that everybody plays a role in this, right? And from and it might seem daunting looking at all the different consumer decisions you can make, looking at all the different transportation decisions you can make, like all these different things, but they do matter. And I think don't get bogged down and don't get depressed about things, but look at yourself and look at ways that inspire you and you're passionate about, and pursue those with passion, and just explore those opportunities, because every one of us, there's things that we can do, multiple things, whether it's again planting a small flower pot of pollinator species in your backyard, or just doing an extra good job of recycling, or buying at your local food market, or even just kind of looking at where your food comes from. So all of these kind of different things all play a role. We're all ecological restorationists. We're all conservationists. We just need to kind of hone and develop our skills and pursue those things passionately, and follow what inspires you and makes you excited. Because I think, that's, if you follow your heart, and I know it sounds cliche, it's never wasted time. It's never wasted effort. It's never in vain. And that's, I think, how you kind of can stay positive and empower yourself, and you'll be connected through those pursuits with other like-minded people, that something can be done. I think humans are a keystone species ecologically. We've just kind of lost our way a bit, but we have this really huge capacity and ability to make a really positive difference for ecosystems around us, if we can just harness that.
Perfect answer. And if you want to find many more people like Kyle that are equally inspirational, everything we do goes to our YouTube channel. So if you want to share this program with your friends, family, this has been a particularly optimistic and hopeful session today. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise, your passion, everything. Again, this is part of our Epic ECOP series, our first of many in the months to come. You can check out Kyle's program there, all the other ones upcoming. And if you want to check out Kyle's organization to learn even more about the amazing work he and his team do, peninsulastreams.ca, it's right there. I really encourage you to see that. Kyle, this has been a real pleasure, man. Thank you so much. I'll say farewell for the live broadcast for our classes at home and watching it after the fact too. Have a wonderful